Alright, hey guys. So this is a bit different than anything I've posted before, but a D&D session is starting, or I'm going to start running a D&D campaign, and I figured I'd just, I don't know, make kind of I don't know if I'd call it a guide, but just the thought process on prepping some sessions. So this hopefully turns into a series, but for now this is prepping session 0. And if you haven't heard of session 0, I feel like it's become a bigger concept over the last few years. I think when D&D 3.5 was around, character creation took like multiple hours, so it was pretty common to have your first session as like character creation and maybe talk about the campaign, and then rarely did you have time to do much else. Or maybe you'd like get the little role-playing aspect, like the little role-playing meetup in a tavern out of the way type of thing, something like that. But now with 5th edition, making a character takes, you could put one together in 15 minutes, but let's say it takes like an hour to get everything hammered out. So now that leaves this first session. If you're only using the first, say, hour or less to make your character, do you try to run the game then, or do you use it to talk about the campaign? So a designated session 0 has become a bigger thing lately, and I really like that because the biggest point here is just manage expectations. And this is going to include scheduling, and when to meet, and how often. So this is a good time to make sure that everyone's on the same page with scheduling. If you guys are some people working, some people not, if some people are in college, or some have jobs, some working nights, like figuring out consistently when you want to meet and how often you want to meet. If everyone's super busy and it's like we set aside one Saturday a month and play for a huge amount of time, or we play online for 2 hours once a week. I think the session 0, and maybe even before session 0, make sure it's possible, but make sure to hammer it out here, so that you don't meet up once or twice and then half the people can't show up the rest of the time that you want to meet. So I think that's a huge one that has definitely been a killer for some of my campaigns that we've tried to start, especially when it's a mix of people in school, people working, and people with families and stuff. So like when you mix all those things together, depending on the age group, it can make scheduling a little weird, and so it's good to hammer that out. And then likewise, if you're planning on this campaign lasting for months or potentially a year, if you are in college, then your schedule's going to change, so maybe a little bit of like heads up or planning for that. But at the very least, just looking ahead like the next month or two and see if like what's doable. So outside of scheduling, I guess this is kind of expectations, which I've put up here, but expectations, this is silly, but just general expectations. So let's name a couple things. So campaign setting. Faroon, I don't know how to spell that. Eberron. Sorry for any spelling. I'm bad at spelling fantasy things. That looks wrong to me. Eberron, homebrew, etc. So I think this is worth, at the very least, mentioning to your players. If you're running a homebrew thing, and let's say dwarves in your homebrew setting all live in some certain place or are not martial or something like that. Or there's certain prejudices against certain races or different things, especially if it's contrary to what's in the player's handbook. Like definitely mention those things. You don't have to go super in depth like right up front, but if someone wants to play a dwarf, you probably want to tell them like, oh, in my campaign, here's the general view of dwarves, and here's maybe some like either stereotypes or just how dwarves see the world and how the world sees them in general. If you're running in like Faerun or Eberron, I'm going to put Forgotten Realms because that's going to look nicer. The more official ones, then if you have any alterations to these or limitations like, oh, you're playing in Eberron, but I don't want players to be a Warforged, or I see Warforged as this rather than what they are per canon, then mention that. And then outside of campaign setting, well, let's do it its own thing. Campaign ideas / campaign trail. Something that I've kind of learned is this, even though sometimes it can feel like you're maybe giving like some spoilers or maybe railroading your players, I think a little bit of that, or at least like, hey, here's some of my idea and here's what I'm kind of like writing towards, is worth telling your players. If you view of the game as your players acting more as mercenaries, or if they're going to be exploring dungeons more, and that's what you're building, if you've been building dungeons, then tell your players that. Tell them that you're looking at building more dungeons, and or that you are envisioning them fighting in a war, if they want to, and it can be a back and forth. You can talk about it, and I think some DMs, some popular ones, I've been watching a lot of Arcadum, and he's awesome, but he has like full campaigns already set up and lets the players choose. If you're just starting, that's not going to be a thing for you, and it's going to be very hard to write something on the fly that feels as fulfilling as other stuff you've put work into or are excited about. So just discuss it with your players, and if your players are like, we don't want to be mercenaries, or we don't really want to explore a dungeon, we'd rather fight in a war, then this is where the group narrative building, I think, really starts. Is if you start in session 0 and say, let's come up with something that would be good for everyone together, or like some ideas that you guys like, I think that really really helps the DM, because then you're not writing this war game campaign when your players just want to go dungeon delving, and there's no disconnect. Again, you're just managing their expectations so that they have an idea of what they're getting into, they're on board with it, and then there's just good feedback both ways. And maybe their ideas change. Maybe they're like, oh, I've only ever done dungeon stuff in Dungeons and Dragons, so I like the idea of that, but I'm willing to give the war thing a try. And then you can kind of plan it out or try it from there, maybe push in some dungeoning stuff if that's their preference, but at least I like this as a talking point. Some other things, character cohesion, I guess I would say. Cohesion, is that right? So another thing that I've seen, I don't want to say specifically kill campaigns, but really become a pain over the course of a campaign, is basically the players just not playing together. And again, managing your expectations in this, because if the players are brand new to D&D, or if their only experience in D&D is watching, say, Critical Role. Critical Role's amazing, like absolutely incredible, but it's very different than typical D&D in the sense of Critical Role more so is actors putting on a show for viewers. And so in that sense, if you look at it as that's their job, is to provide an entertaining show, then when one character wants to go off on their own for 3 hours or however long, most of the other people are pretty okay taking the back seat that session and letting that character get a nice spotlight, and the viewers being able to find out like big things about that character because it's entertaining to the audience. But at your own table, that likely won't be the case, especially if you guys are meeting up for 3 hours and then one character wants to go off and do their own thing for an hour of it, and your other players are just expected to sit there. Most of the time, that's not a good time for them, and a lot of times it makes it much harder for the DM as well, because then most of the encounters you've planned are for so people to encounter them, and now you either have random new encounters for a single player that you've just got to come up with on the fly, or one player trying to push into those encounters by himself, and it just takes a little bit of juggling on your end, which you'll always be doing, but it feels less rewarding because it was a thing that was gonna benefit the whole party or be an experience for the whole party, and now it's only an experience for one player. So that's, I would say that's one aspect of character cohesion. Like, how can you guys work together? The other end on this is, what does PvP look like? And for me personally, I push for no PvP. And some people don't like that. Some people think it's a little immersion breaking to like have this out of character like mindset of, I'm not gonna fight my party, even if something in character would lead to that. But I think one, out of character PvP again often just turns into two people just having the spotlight for some extended period of time, or one person gets their stuff stolen and you just let that happen as the DM, or you don't let it happen, and so it's either one person gets their stuff stolen and is upset, or the other person gets consequences and is upset that this game they thought they could do anything in, they're getting like punished. So instead, trying to pitch to their players that since we're trying to make this as fun as possible for everyone, that PvP is just, for the most part, off the table, unless everyone at the table agrees to it. The other aspect of this is, it kind of, if you know there's the possibility of PvP at your table, it really changes how you build a character and kind of how you play the game. Because say you're playing like an upfront fighter character, you almost never want to just put yourself on the line if at any time the rogue could just stab you in the back. And maybe you like that sense of immersion for it, but in terms of like the pace of the game, it just slows down encounters to even a more glacial pace, because everyone plays more careful, and it just turns into this more in not infighting, but like argument back and forth type of thing, rather than the party working together to move through this story that you've built for them. So I guess on this we'll put stance on PvP. We have staying together versus not, and And I think cohesion kind of encapsulates what I was going for with that second point. Maybe we'll put splitting, even though that's kind of covered with staying together versus not. Splitting the party. So, and again, you can go either way on any of these. Some people really like PvP or really like the idea of splitting the party, like 2 rogues scouting ahead. But if you discuss it beforehand, if you don't like it as the DM, or if you're fine with it as the DM, but the players aren't, like some players don't like that they're sitting on the sidelines while 2 rogues are doing their own thing for some extended amount of time, this is the time to talk about it during this session 0. So other things, I want to put NPCs on here, but I want to give it its own section. Goodness. So NPCs is an interesting one that I don't think anyone talks about all that much when they talk about a session 0. And this could be ones that the players, oh goodness, ones that the players know individually. Ones that the players know collectively. 2+ players know an NPC. Or commonly known NPCs in your world. And this might be covered, like some people might cover this with like a handout or something. But something I really like the idea of is this middle one here, is in session 0, as the players are making their characters, if they tie their backstories in at all, then it's pretty likely that they've met some of the same people. So then they get the chance, like you can just give them the chance to build NPCs on their own. Like just have them come up with NPC personalities, and like who that person was. Obviously you could put some limits on it if they're trying to say like, oh yeah, we were both sons of a king and have some huge inheritance. Like you can manage all that, but or allow or disallow whatever you want, kind of steer their creativity a little bit to fit your world, but allow players to create NPCs that they have known. And likewise here, I think let the players create NPCs that they know. I mean, commonly this would be like friends, family, but I think even outside of that, like you can allow players to create NPCs that they have known. So here we're going to put friends, family, merchants, coworkers, stuff like that. Whereas this would be more innkeeper type of characters, innkeeper types, guard types, others that players may have interacted with together. And really this one is the exciting one to me because it gets 2 players to build together, because it's easy for someone to just list off like, oh, my father was killed, my mother still works at doing this at home, I had a brother but he ran off, and like give just this little like mini lore write up for their character if you really push them to. But this is where I think those characters actually start to get fleshed out. Like, oh yeah, we both know the innkeeper, Bill, and then like, well, what type of personality does Bill have? And then they can decide between them who Bill was and kind of just build him himself. And so this kind of pushes the characters to get into that collective storytelling a little bit more, like because they're helping create your world. Obviously, if you're doing a what you call it, like a pre-made campaign, or if you have some like interconnected homebrew thing or something a little more strict, this isn't always possible, or it isn't always something that people can just do freely. But you can always add whatever restrictions you want, and you can say create people that like you both know that you haven't seen for 5 years, especially if players like intertwine their backstories at all. And so I'm going to go up here with that is character creation. So obviously character sheets, but also characters with intertwining backstories. And again, for me, this was always something that was like on the table if people wanted to do, but rarely, unless characters were the same race, rarely did this come up. Even if the players were all from a town of like 50 people, like no one was like kind of brainstorming how they would have known each other the last 20 years that they lived in this town. It was just, this is what I've been doing and here I am. Or more commonly, I'm a traveler from wherever and I'm in this town. So this kind of steps into some of these where you can do a little bouncing around of let them create some NPCs together, and then say that the two players are creating Bill, the innkeeper. Then you can pose to your other two players, did either of you guys know Bill as well? And then they can chime in with a yes or no, and here's the reasons why, and here's what they thought of them. Maybe one character really likes Bill and the other two characters hate him, or whatever. Like it really allows for some more creativity on their part. Other big things. I feel like there's more. As just another shout out to someone, Dungeon Dudes, I've been following a lot of their stuff recently, and I really like how they present a lot of their stuff, and their Session Zero video is really great. So I'd recommend watching that if you want a very like broad structured, like here's some good things to do in Session Zero. Whereas this is more, I'm going to use this tomorrow for setting up my Session Zero. And also, if anyone happens to see this and wants me to stream it, I wasn't planning on streaming Session Zero because largely it's just going to be me explaining the campaign to my players, and then they're also probably going to be downloading some stuff and doing a lot of the fiddly prepping. So it'll probably be next week when we try to start streaming the actual campaign start. Alright, so character creation, intertwining backstories, and tie-ins. Creating NPCs together. So this is mostly it. This, maybe I create some specifics on why splitting the party. You as the DM, okay with it? Are the players okay with it? From my experience, most often the players are more okay with it when they're the ones splitting. Like if you're the rogue, you want to go off on your own. That's like the classic one because you have stealth and you want to leave the guys in heavy plate behind and go do stealth stuff. But it could be anyone. It could be the warlock going off and doing something for his patron. But that's just something to keep in mind and pose to the other players, especially as they make characters or as they make backstories and have specific like things that you want to hook in. Uh, like asking this question of, are they okay splitting? Alignment. I'm just going to put my stance, but my stance is the party must be able to work together. And my example is specifically looking at like a video game dungeon or raid. So I'm going to say World of Warcraft dungeon. And this is pretty much what I use to try to explain it to any of my players who don't like the idea of no PvP. Is just who wants to play the healer if the whole party can turn on you, or if you're going to have to be on your own for a little while, or who wants to be the tank if just the party could turn on you. Everyone would want to build the character with the most innate survivability, and being able to like kite and do different things. So I don't know. Like I can see both sides to it. Like the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, oh, but the realism is, if you were stuck with a band of 5 other people, you'd want to watch your back. But it just leads to like more boring gameplay, in my opinion. And really, it leads to less gameplay rather than more boring gameplay, when it comes down to it. But that's my like couple experiences with it. And then if it's some like sneaky, I backstab everyone, it usually just leaves most everyone feeling bad, unless it's something that was like planned, foreshadowed, or like discussed. Because then people can kind of get on board. And maybe, sorry, this example, I really went off the rails here with this. All of this I wanted, holy cow. All of this I went down here. Sorry. The WoW dungeon example is just specifically against PvP. For alignment, tension is fine. You can have an evil character, but still be able to do things together and not need to split. So this is the idea of, like the necromancer and the paladin in the same party. You just have to find a way to justify why they're working together. And maybe it's something as simple as the paladin thinks that spending time together, he'll be able to stop the necromancer from doing more evil. And maybe the necromancer just sees the paladin as a tool or a means to an end. So the thing that happens there is then when the necromancer does do a tremendous evil or something like that, what's the paladin do? If the answer is the paladin just wants to fight him, then that's where I would say we need to plan ahead for that. Like, we don't want it to just be, I'm going to stop him from doing evil and I'll attack him if he does, because that ruins the whole idea of this. That steps right into PvP. And it's fun maybe from a story perspective, but it turns into not fun for both the players that aren't involved in that and the player that dies in that scenario. And it really pushes and rewards min-maxing, because the person that really did everything the most optimally just is rewarded there, whereas the person that tried to roleplay or pick some fun choices over just the most optimal choices loses because of that, and I don't ever like that. So so the alternative, if you have an unreconcilable difference, is retiring characters. So if a character has an impossible, we could say difference or qualm with the party, or if the character accomplishes their ultimate, I'm going to cap it, ultimate goal. So those two things, if the character has an impossible qualm with the party, basically like, let's say it's a cleric or anyone, and there's a rogue in the party that insists on stealing stuff from this guy, and just each night it's like, oh, I steal some stuff, and you can handle it however you want as the DM, but when it comes to, okay, like there would be some like PvP like confrontation moment, I think it just becomes a, we're not going to work with this guy anymore because he keeps stealing our stuff, so get away from us. And then that character is retired. And that probably needs some discussion, but it could be like the player is role-playing towards that, and is trying to be like a lone wolf character. And I think a lot of lone wolf characters lend to this. Let's say you're playing a ranger even, who his goal, or like his like thing, is to protect this forest and this like realm. And so he comes to the town that's nearby to help fight off like these undead things or these monster things that are around. You fight, you get through to like level 5, you kill all the monsters that are like harassing this town and forest. So then the adventurers want to go to the city that's a ways down south. Well, this ranger, like story-wise, may have zero reason to want to go with them. Even if they're trying to save the world, the ranger may not care. And this is like a decision that the player can make is, hey, just this ranger, like the ranger that I'm playing, does not care as much about trying to fight this super evil like lich who's taken over. He's more concerned about just keeping this town and forest safe, so he's going to stick around here, and I'll make another character, or like we'll find something for him. Maybe they meet someone on the way or someone in the town, and you can kind of build that into the story. But this idea of retiring characters in that sense, when they no longer jive with the party, is something that I really like from a storytelling standpoint, because then you're not trying to loosely justify the motives of why a character's staying with the party when it feels like in game he wouldn't be. And that also, that lone wolf thing kind of leans into this ultimate goal. If you're playing a rogue who's trying to get like ultimate wealth and really just trying to get money, and you find like a kingdom's worth of gold, then it's totally reasonable, instead of like buying a fancy dagger, to just buy a castle and live in luxury. Like that seems more in line with that character's like goal than continuing to scrape by as you now have this fancy dagger and you go off killing things. But that's as you like your players build characters. But I think pitching this idea that the players have this choice to retire their characters, or if they feel like the character that they've built their PC into is like not in line with the party, or wants to go do their own thing, then they can, and they just roll a new character. So I I'm excited about discussing this, and I like the idea of this. Um, Matt Colville has a lot of he made the whole strongholds and followers thing, and I think a lot of times this is the potential alternative for if you get a castle and you don't want to deal with the whole strongholds like rules and dealing with it, and you just want to have your players play as adventurers, or if a player doesn't want to be part of the cleric's like church stronghold thing and they want to go do their own thing, then they can retire and like different people come in, and then that character can either be played later or becomes an important NPC, or an NPC that the players know and can interact with. In the case of like the greedy rogue, he could easily become an NPC that the players like fight against. If he knows that the players are amassing wealth through looting dungeons, maybe the rogue decides it's easier to just hang out at the tavern and then try to steal from these guys whenever they come back to the tavern from looting a dungeon than it is to go to the dungeon himself. So I think this builds some neat NPCs for you, and also gives the players more room to make decisions that feel good when it comes to their characters. And likewise, they can totally keep that rogue with the party and just not steal from the party. Still like play with the party. Likewise with the Lone Ranger, even though they've cleared out the forest, maybe the player says, "Oh no, he will join the players because why not?" And that's all totally fine and great. So I think this is mostly it. I'm sure I've missed something that was on my mind, but I mean, obviously character creation is a large chunk of it, and then explaining this. Oh, I want to put campaign handout. I'm going to move this up here. Oh, wait. It moved something weird. But, so some older DMs, or just different DMs, a campaign handout is normal, and sometimes it's huge, and sometimes it's small. Just because I kind of mashed my current campaign into the like basic write-up of a previous one, this is almost like 3 campaign handouts in one. You don't have to make it 2 full pages. You don't even have to make one at all, but it is something that you can just hand the players or read to the players and give them an idea of like, here's my ideas for like where you're starting and what's going on in the world, with just some of the key points. And you can make the narrative sound however you want. It can sound like more dystopian. It can sound like they're more down on their luck. It could sound like the town they're in is more down on its luck, or that's thriving, or whatever. You can get more, like I gave a little more like meta knowledge about this company, because if the idea is they've been with this company for 10ish years, they would know like some of how the thing worked. So I just wrote up a little bit on what I thought. I wrote up a little bit on the town that they're starting in. And then this goes back to the homebrew thing, where I really like the idea of high fantasy, or where there's like less magic. And I don't want to limit anything, so like everyone can be wizards, everyone can learn any spell. I'm not like cutting off a specific thing of magic, just saying that it's less common, and the world itself is maybe a little more mundane than what a typical Forgotten Realm or Eberron setting is. So So I wanted to include that in there with like a little narrative to it and give a little like idea on what Magic looks like and who's making moves when it comes to Magic. So so that's an option that's available, and the more you know your players, the better you can kind of cater this to them. For me, I'm sure of at least one that probably won't read this at all. But it is what it is. Like, I'll hand this to them and they'll have it. I know at least two of them will probably read the whole thing. So and they can always like have it. You can post it like in Discord or something. They can look it up if later it's like, oh yeah, you guys are gonna go through the hierarchy of this black company, and then maybe they reference this and kind of look at what that looks like. So that's pretty much it. I feel like I'm always long-winded in every video, and this one more so since it's pretty open-ended on what you can be doing. I tried to keep this relatively brief. And I guess the final thing would be playing. And probably decide and tell players prior to session 0 if you'll be playing during session 0. And again, with managing expectations, when the players sit down in session 0, especially if it's going to be like an in-person meeting, they drive to meet up, you guys are together for a couple hours, them knowing whether or not you're playing at session 0 could be a big deal to them. And a lot of times when I've done a session 0 and haven't had like a full like, hey, here's some things we're going to talk about or go over, I want you guys to make NPCs or stuff like that, after the first like hour or 2 hours, everyone's made their characters, and then they all look to me and say like, all right, let's play, like, let's get to it. I'm fine staying for another couple hours. So and you can easily bring some little thing, some like the call to adventure, or do some like your setting role playing, how they all met each other or something prior to getting to the tavern, something along those lines. But that's something I would say prior to session 0, or as they sit down for session 0, tell them, so they're not rushing through this part hoping that you're going to start playing. But that's basically all I got for my session 0 notes. Again, the dungeon dudes have been really awesome, especially for their session 0 notes, but a lot of their content's great. Nerdarchy always has a lot of good videos, and then Matt Colville has the Running the Game series, which especially if you're just starting and trying to like get into being a dungeon master, the first episode of that and the first few are super helpful, and a lot of his combat things and like just general ideas on how you build your town are really useful. So hope any of that helps. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.